Next, are you having brake problems? Well, before you go ahead and get your brakes replaced, go ahead and watch this video to prevent yourself from getting ripped off. A friend of mine recently asked whether he should replace his brake pads and rotors on his 911, so I haven't really had time to sync up with him. So Peter, if you're watching, this video is to help you answer that. So the first common problem we're going to tackle today is brake squealing and whether you should replace your brake pads and rotors and other brake components to resolve the squealing issue. So there's a common misconception that squealing means your brake pads are running low. Now for a lot of cars, they still use the metal wear indicators, and these little metal tabs will touch the brake rotor whenever your brake pads wear down, and that's going to cause squealing. That is true. But for a lot of newer cars and cars like my Porsche, cars use these brake pad sensors. So unless these brake sensors go off, that actually means you have a lot of brake pad left. What happens is when you wear out the brake pads, these sensors eventually make contact with the brake rotor. And when that happens, it will trigger the brake warning indicator in your car. So if you do have a newer car and you have these types of sensors, just because you have squealing doesn't necessarily mean you need to replace your brake pads. Now let me show you how to measure the health of your brake pads so you can determine if your brake pads are causing the squealing or if it's something else. So to figure how much brake pad you have left, you actually don't even need to remove your wheels on your car for most cars. Now here is one of my old brake pads from the back of the car, and I'm going to show you how to measure how much brake pad you have left. So here I have a brake pad thickness measuring device, and let me show you how it works. You essentially take these different sides here and you put it up against the backing over there, and then this will give you a sense of how much brake pad you have left. So this right here is the minimum amount of brake pad you want to have. Generally on most cars it's 2 millimeters. So even though I replaced my brake pads in the back, you can still see I have a ton of brake pad life left. Now let me show you how to measure your brake pads without actually taking off your wheels. So you want to start off by taking a look at your brake pad and then just estimating what level of thickness you have left. So I'm going to start off with the 6 millimeters, and I'm just going to press the flat edge against the brake rotor and see if this is the right thickness. So as you can see here, I have a lot more thickness left than 6 millimeters. Let's go ahead and bump it up to 8 millimeters and see if that gets us closer. All right, and putting the 8 millimeter in, and I still have a little bit of space. Let's go up to the next size. All right, and the 10 millimeter won't fit, so I have somewhere between 8 and 10 millimeters of brake pad left, so about 9 millimeters. Now the brake pads, brand new, are around 12 millimeters in thickness, and you can get them all the way down to 2 millimeters. So that really gives you about 10 millimeters of wear on your brake pads. So I've used up about 3 millimeters of the brake pads out of the 10 millimeters that I could use. So I have roughly about 70% of my brake pads left. Not too bad considering I've done a couple of track days with these brake pads. And the other question I get from people is when to replace the brake rotors. Now generally when you replace the brake pads, you want to replace the rotors at the same time because they'll typically wear out at the same rate. But you can still inspect your brake rotors to see what condition they're in. So first, if you put your finger against the brake rotor and you run it along, it should feel pretty smooth. You shouldn't feel any ridges or anything like that. Now my particular brake rotor has some lines over here, but that's because I washed the car and I haven't quite gotten all of the corrosion off afterward that formed, but my rotors are really smooth and they're in good shape. The other thing you want to look for is whether you have a lip on the edge of your brake rotor. So as the brake pads wear into the brake rotors, at the edge where the brake pad doesn't touch, you're going to develop a lip. If you have any type of lip, you should probably get your brake rotors replaced whenever you do your brake pads. Now some people might say you should resurface your brake rotors to save money, but for most cars, replacing the brake rotors costs about as much as resurfacing them, so it kind of doesn't make sense. The other pro tip here is whether you're replacing the brake rotors yourself or having a mechanic do it, ask for the old brake rotors back. You can actually recycle these and get a good amount of money. For example, I was able to recycle each of these brake rotors for around $10 each. So if you think about the cost of a rotor being $30 to $40 per side, you can get about $10 back by just taking it to your local recycler and recycling that. So let's say your brake pads are okay and your rotors, but your brakes are still squealing. What's going on? So really your brake pads can squeal for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of the main issues for squealing is vibration. So one way of getting vibration is simply the pistons are pressing on the back of the brake pads, and for whatever reason there's a very slight shimmer or vibration, and that's going to cause noise when you try to brake. Now these brake pads actually have an adhesive material that attach to some shims, and the shims go into the brake pads, and this actually prevents vibration from occurring. Now for other cars, sometimes they'll put some special brake grease on the back just to kind of dampen that vibration. You also want to put some grease along the edges here, that way everything can move smoothly in the caliper and not get vibration. The other thing that can cause vibration are just the hardware in your brake calipers. So this right here is just a spring that keeps the brake pads in place in the caliper, and over time these hardware items can wear out, and when that happens you don't have the same kind of springiness, and that can lead to some vibration and cause some noise. So if your brake pads are okay and your rotors are okay, you don't necessarily need to replace them to resolve a squeaking issue. Instead, have your mechanic just take a look and check out the hardware. That could be a culprit, or just change out the damper pads. Now this is going to arm you with information so you can second guess if your mechanic tells you you need to replace everything and spend a bunch of money. The other complaint people have is sometimes their brakes are very spongy, or the brake pedal goes down excessively. So a lot of times this can be introduced because you have air in the system, or maybe you have a brake fluid leak somewhere. Now how you want to test for this is you want to just press your brakes, and when you start up the car, the brake pedal shouldn't really go down too much and it should stay firm. If it does go all the way to the floor or get really soft, you could have a brake fluid leak somewhere, or you might just be low on brake fluid or have air in the system. Let me show you how to check that out. Okay, so to check out your brake fluid level, you just want to locate your brake fluid reservoir. So for me, my brake reservoir is just under the front compartment area. So what you can do is you can take a look here, and on my reservoir there's actually a line here that says minimum and maximum, and I can see that my brake fluid level is still good. So if you are getting spongy brakes, check this out first and see what your brake fluid level is like. If it's low, go ahead and take some brake fluid, top it off, and see if that helps with the issue. If it doesn't, you could have air in your system, or maybe you even have a leak somewhere. So as you add that brake fluid, just look around and see if you have brake fluid leaking anywhere. So another problem people complain about is they get vibration either in the steering wheel or pulsation coming through the brake pedals whenever they're applying the brakes. Usually that's because you either have very grooved rotors, or your rotors could be warped. Now in this case, the rotors here are all smooth, so I'm not having any issues. But if you do have vibration, go ahead and take a look at your rotors and see if they're grooved, and if they're not, it could be the fact that they're warped, and that could be causing that. The other culprit for vibration or pulsation could simply be the fact that you have an uneven amount of brake pad transfer on the rotors. So as you're applying the brakes, over time that's going to deposit brake pad material on your rotors. So if this happens unevenly, it could give you some pulsation and vibration whenever you apply the brakes. To test for this, what you want to do is drive your car at maybe 40 or 50 miles per hour, and then do a very hard stop, and then keep doing that, do it a few times, really let this warm up. Now what that's going to do is, if you do have uneven brake pad deposit on your rotors, it's going to wear that off and make it more even, and that should help you reduce the vibration. So you might want to try that out before getting your brake rotors replaced. A more serious issue that people complain about is uneven braking. So when they apply the brakes, the car will either pull to the left or right. So usually if that happens, that could mean one, maybe you have mismatching brake pads, and that's causing one side to grab harder than the other. The other thing is you could have a brake fluid leak somewhere, and that brake fluid could be getting on your rotor and brake pad, and that's causing one of the brake calipers and rotors to just not grab as well as the other. The other thing that could be causing that is, of course, you might have a warp rotor on one side and not on the other, or things that get a little bit more serious, you could have a bad brake caliper. So sometimes these brake calipers get a lot of corrosion, they start to get stuck, and therefore the braking on each side is a bit uneven in pressure. Another issue that people complain about and is more serious is called dragging brakes. So let's say you apply the brakes, and when you let off, it feels like the brakes just take some time to let out. Now if you do feel that, you could potentially have a bad brake caliper, because these brake calipers will get corrosion over time, and sometimes the pistons won't return. And if that happens, it can actually engage the brake pads even when you're not applying the brakes. This can be really dangerous. I came across a woman who had total brake failure. Basically, she had a bad brake caliper that was engaging her brakes the entire time, and by the time she got into town, it had gotten so hot, literally her brake rotor had disintegrated. It was completely gone because it got so hot. So you do want to be careful if your brakes are dragging. I would definitely take it to a reputable mechanic and have them check it out. Well, there you go, car fanatics. If you're having brake issues, just go ahead and inspect your brake rotors and your brake pads and make sure they're good to go. Check your fluid level, and that should help you understand where the source of your problem could potentially be coming from. So whether you're doing it yourself or taking it to a shop, doing some initial research yourself is going to help save you money and prevent you from spending money on unnecessary parts or being taken for a fast one. Well, thanks for watching, car fanatics. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Leave any comments or questions below, and be sure to hit the bell notification icon so you're notified each time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching.